Let's talk about your first essay. There are some details at the top of the assignment here that tell you when it is due and when it is assigned and the day that it will be returned or the week that it will be returned. The length of the paper is approximately 2,300 words plus or minus 10%. That means you can cut it or add by 200 plus words. That's about the length that you need. Now, you want to be careful with word length because it really doesn't measure something called density, which is how much you say in those number of words. So basically this is a signal to you about how much context you have to deal with and how much you have to say. And we are expecting that you will edit the prose so that it is succinct and concise, and that you are not padding it with extra fluff. The paper has to be submitted as an MS Word document and attached in an email that you send to en1001@yorku.ca. That is how you are going to submit your papers. In the subject field of that email, you are going to put your instructor's surname. So it's either going to be Paolucci, Khan, or Smith. And that's all you put in the subject field. In the body of the email, you enter your own first and last name. That's because your email address in some cases may not tell us who you are. If you have an account, cutiepatootie@hotmail.com, I have no idea who you are as a student in our course. And so in the body of the email, simply your first name and your last name and your student number. Some students, for reasons I don't understand, will submit a title page separately from the paper. I don't want you to do that. I want you to do it as one single document. And do not use max pages to create this. If this is the tool that you have, the only tool that you have to write, you're welcome to do that. But inside that software, excuse me, you're going to have an option to export it or save as, I think it's export, as a Microsoft Word file, and that's what I want you to do. Any infraction here, failure to put this in the subject field, failure to put this in the body of the email, failure to attach your document, could cost you an additional 5% for every infraction. And that is entirely up to your tutorial leader's discretion, so you want to make sure you do that. This warning is in bold for a reason, because we are deadly serious about it. No secondary sources of any kind are permitted. By secondary sources, I mean criticism, Google, Schmoop, Spark Notes, any of that crap that's out there on the internet, you are not to use in any way. At all. So I just want you to use course material, the texts themselves, and your own brain. That is it. You can use the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. You can use any material in our Norton text. And there is a, at the back of the Norton, there is a glossary of literary terms that you might find very helpful to you in your discussion. There are handouts and materials and resources on Moodle that you not only can use, but you should use. So we want you to engage course materials in every way possible, but not external sources. The deadline is firm. You have to submit it. I think it says down here. I'll get to it. The deadline is absolutely firm. You're going to have a 24-hour extension, but after that, we're not taking any papers. You'll get a 0. So we are very serious about the timeline and the deadline for submission, so don't mess that up. The only exception for an extension on the paper is that without penalty is a doctor's note or a lawyer saying you're in jail or on jury duty. Or documentation from some legitimate healthcare professional. Now, that documentation has to state clearly that you needed a 2-day extension or a 3-day extension. The note can't simply say you were sick. That doesn't tell us anything. If you are looking for a 3-day extension, you need a doctor's note saying that you were down for 3 days and unable to complete the work. So that's the deal. If there are extenuating circumstances, you should be discussing that with your tutorial leader well in advance of the due date. Last minute stuff is not particularly welcome in this course. You will not be able to do last minute stuff. So if you are anticipating some particular extenuating circumstance, you need to raise it with your tutorial leader sooner rather than later. You will be graded in part on how thorough and detailed and specific you are in the application of course materials to your own analysis of these stories. I want you to follow the MLA formatting as best as possible, mainly in terms of what I call inline citation, which is how you refer to page numbers when you are writing. So if you're going to have a quote from a text, you need simply an open close parentheses and the page number in there without a P period for page, just the number, and that's it. Go and look at the examples. I am exempting you from a bibliography because the 3 sources that we're using, everybody knows it's a common source, and I'm going to exempt you from formatting that into a bibliography. You will do that later in the course when we come to talk about a major paper. Somewhere in the paper itself, you need to include your first and last name, your student number, your email address, your tutorial leader's full name, the course name and number, the title of your essay, which is going to be important, and the date here. But let me say something else about the title, because I'm going to talk about it in a separate discussion this week. Don't give us a crap title that you haven't thought about. So if your essay, if the title of your paper is Essay 1 Comparative Analysis, that is not going to bode well for you, because that doesn't tell us anything about your thesis. Here is some good news for you. Everyone is entitled to a 24-hour extension, but you still have to follow all the rules of submission, which basically means email it to en1001@yorku.ca and follow all of that stuff that I talked about. You do get a 24-hour extension so that 11:59 p.m. of the next day after the due date, you have to submit it, otherwise you get a 0. Finally, there is something called a blackout period that starts 24 hours before the due date and extends to 24 hours after the due date. During that time, any questions you have about the assignment may or may not be answered by your tutorial leader. If it's something that you should have known at the beginning or should have known earlier, we are not going to respond. So that means that you guys have to get on top of this assignment the day that it is assigned, and you have to monitor yourself ruthlessly to make sure that your timetable of drafts and that your scheduling of your work is such that you're going to get this thing in on time. My advice always is, this is what I do in my own work. If you have a deadline of a particular date, I always make the deadline 3 or 4 days earlier than the real deadline. And that is the self-imposed deadline. I want to make sure I get everything done with 2 or 3 days to spare, ideally 4 or 5 days to spare. That way, if I get into trouble and I need an extension, I can ask myself, and I will give myself the extension, and I will have time to get it done. So you cannot leave things to the last minute in this course, or you will sink like a stone. Okay, here's the task. There are 3 short stories, and when I say short, man, oh man, these stories are ridiculously short. They cannot get any shorter. So you're going to have to read all 3 of them. You're going to have to read The Story of an Hour, you're going to have to read The Yellow Wallpaper, and you're going to have to read Girl. And the task is to write a comparative analysis that engages the commonalities of all 3 stories. And you're going to have to construct an argument that unifies these 3 stories in terms of some kind of overarching argument that the text provides. Now, we always begin with any literary analysis with the assumption that the purpose of every literary text is to persuade us of something. That every text has a purpose for an intended audience, but the purpose is to persuade us sometimes to feel things, to think things, to experience things. Whatever it is, the text is an inherent argument to persuade us about something. And that argument is made two ways. It is made explicitly through text, that is to say, through the literal telling of the story. And secondly, in more subtle ways, it is expressed through subtext, not by stating things literally, but by showing through behaviors and through other ways of implying what the argument is. So, some suggestions on how to begin your analysis, and there'll be other discussions this week as well on how to go about analysis, but you have to begin with what you think the shared topic and theme are of these two stories. A topic is what the subject is about. A theme is an argument. And so the difference is very clear. A topic would be the moon. That's the general subject under discussion. A theme would be something like the moon is made of green cheese, or that the moon circles the earth so many times in so many months or so many hours. Once you have a claim that requires some proof, we're talking about a theme. So you need to identify both the topic and the theme of these stories. And you need to show us where in the text it says that, exactly where in the text. And I'm going to demonstrate this for you because I am actually going to analyze 2 out of these 3 stories and get you started into thinking about how they work. Also, you are going to have to take the 2 stories that I've talked about and add your own insight, and then write something that connects the 3rd story to the first 2. So I'm going to be talking about the story of an hour and Jamaica Kincaid's girl, and you're going to use that as a basis for your comparative analysis, but you're going to have to connect those to the yellow wallpaper. So you're looking for a shared area of discussion and some kind of shared explicit or implicit argument that is emerging from these particular texts. Sometimes it says here, insight into character and interpersonal relationships are revealed through moments of surprise and irony. You're trying to identify any of those moments, or what I call poignant moments in the text that might lead you to come to some conclusion about what the main ideas are. Lastly, I'm going to say that there are some valuable resources elsewhere here in week 4 for you to look at, and that the Norton itself has all kinds of discussions of plot, narrative, character setting, symbol, and figurative language and theme. And these have to be part of the vocabulary that you use to construct your paper. If you have any further questions, you should talk to your tutorial leader. Good luck on the paper.